My name is Madison Clarke, and I'm 28 years old. Last Christmas morning, while opening presents under our family's 12-foot Douglas fir, my father delivered news that shattered everything I believed about family loyalty. Madison. Honey, he said with that patronizing smile I'd grown to despise. You've sold Clarke Construction to the Hendersons. Your brother Jake will manage the transition, but there's nothing left for you. The room fell silent except for the crackling fireplace. My mother's face went pale, my sister Emma dropped her coffee mug, and Jake, my supposedly loving twin brother, couldn't even look me in the eye. That moment didn't just ruin Christmas, it exposed a web of lies that had been spinning around me for years, ultimately leading to the most satisfying revenge I never saw coming. Before we dive into how this Christmas betrayal unraveled into the ultimate family karma story, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Are you Team Madison already, or do you think there's more to this story? Hit that like button if you've ever felt betrayed by family, and don't forget to subscribe because this revenge tale is about to get absolutely wild. Trust me, you won't want to miss what happens next in this family drama. Growing up in Millbrook, Connecticut, I always believed our family was built on solid ground, literally and figuratively. Clarke Construction had been my grandfather's legacy, started in 1952 when he returned from Korea, with nothing but determination and a toolbox. Dad used to tell us kids stories about Grandpa Joe building our family's first house with his bare hands, how every nail hammered was a step toward the American dream. The company had grown from a one-man operation to employing over 50 people across 3 counties. Dad had always promised that Jake and I would inherit the business together, 50-50 partners, continuing the Clarke legacy. Blood runs thicker than concrete, head joke, ruffling our hair when we were little. Even our company motto reflected this: Clarke Construction, building dreams, strengthening families. Jake and I had been inseparable growing up, despite being fraternal twins. While I gravitated toward the business side, earning my MBA from Yale and specializing in construction management, Jake preferred the hands-on work. Head started swinging hammers at 14, learning every trade from our seasoned crews. Dad called us his perfect team. My brains and Jake's brawn would take Clarke Construction into the future. After college, I dove headfirst into modernizing our operations. I implemented digital project management systems, streamlined our bidding processes, and expanded our commercial contracts by 40% in just 2 years. Meanwhile, Jake had become our best site foreman, beloved by crews and clients alike. We seemed unstoppable. But looking back, I realized the cracks in our family foundation had been forming for years. Dad had started having more private meetings with Jake, conversations that would stop abruptly when I entered the room. Mom would get this worried look whenever business came up at dinner, quickly changing the subject to safer topics like Emma's art school progress. The first real warning sign came 6 months before that devastating Christmas. I'd been pushing for a major expansion into sustainable building practices, solar installations, green materials, LEED certifications. It was the future of construction, and I had the research to prove it. But Dad kept shutting down my proposals, claiming we needed to stick to what works. Madison, you're thinking too big, Head said during one heated board meeting. Sometimes tradition matters more than innovation. Jake had nodded along, which stung more than Dad's rejection. We were supposed to be partners, but he was clearly Team Dad. Then came the Henderson deal. Tom Henderson owned a smaller construction company that had been struggling financially. His son Brett was a year older than Jake and me, and they'd been sniffing around our contracts for months. When Dad announced he was exploring options with them, I assumed it meant a merger or partnership. I should have known something was wrong when Dad started excluding me from client meetings. You're needed in the office, Head say, while Jake got to handle face-to-face relationships with our biggest accounts. I was being systematically isolated from the human side of our business, the relationships that actually mattered. The paperwork should have been another red flag. Dad had always been meticulous about keeping me informed of major contracts and financial decisions. But suddenly, important documents were being shuffled between Dad and Jake without my input. When I questioned this, Dad would wave me off. Don't worry about the details, sweetheart. Focus on your spreadsheets. That condescending tone became increasingly common. The man who had once praised my business acumen was now treating me like an overeager intern. Every innovative idea I presented was met with patronizing smiles and vague promises to consider it later. Meanwhile, Jake's suggestions, even when they were less strategic than mine, were implemented immediately. Our family dinners became tense affairs. Emma, home from art school, would try to lighten the mood with stories from her classes, but even she could sense the growing tension between Dad, Jake, and me. Mom would fuss over the food, clearly using cooking as an escape from whatever family drama was brewing. The Thanksgiving before that fateful Christmas was particularly awkward. Dad had raised his glass for his traditional toast about family and gratitude, but his eyes never met mine. Jake seemed uncomfortable, fidgeting with his napkin and avoiding eye contact. Even Brett Henderson was there as Jake's guest, which should have been my first clue about how deep this betrayal went. I spent that entire fall feeling like I was losing my mind. The business I'd helped modernize was slipping away from me, one meeting and decision at a time. My own twin brother was becoming a stranger, and my father was treating me like an outsider in my own family company. The night before Christmas Eve, I found Jake in Dad's study, hunched over legal documents spread across the massive oak desk that had belonged to Grandpa Joe. They were whispering urgently, and when I knocked on the door, they quickly shuffled the papers into a briefcase. "Just boring contract stuff," Jake said, but his face was flushed with guilt. "Nothing you need to worry about." But I was worried. Something massive was happening to our family business, and apparently, I was the only one who didn't know about it. Christmas morning started like every other year in the Clarke household. Mom had made her famous cinnamon roll casserole, the tree was surrounded by perfectly wrapped presents, and the whole house smelled like pine needles and vanilla candles. Emma was documenting everything with her camera for her photography portfolio, capturing what she thought would be another perfect family Christmas. Dad was unusually cheerful, almost manic in his enthusiasm for gift-giving. He kept checking his watch and glancing toward Jake, who looked like he might throw up at any moment. Mom was overcompensating with forced cheer, refilling coffee cups and rearranging presents that were already perfectly arranged. We followed our usual routine. Stockings first, then one present at a time going around the circle so everyone could appreciate each gift. I'd gotten Dad a vintage compass engraved with Clarke construction, true north since 1952, thinking it would make him emotional about our shared legacy. His smile seemed forced when he opened it. Emma loved the professional lighting kit I'd bought for her photography studio. Mom was delighted with the spa weekend Jake and I had pooled money for. Everything seemed normal, until Dad stood up, cleared his throat, and announced he had a special Christmas surprise for the family. "This year has been full of big decisions," he began, his voice taking on that formal tone he used during business presentations. "Clarke Construction has grown beyond anything your grandfather could have imagined, and it's time to secure its future." My stomach started churning. Jake was staring at his hands, his knuckles white from gripping his coffee mug. Mom had gone completely still, like she was holding her breath. "Tom Henderson made us an offer we couldn't refuse," Dad continued. "Clarke Construction is now part of Henderson Holdings. The sale closed last week." The room exploded into chaos. Emma dropped her camera, Mom gasped loudly, and I felt like someone had punched me in the chest. But Dad wasn't finished with his surprise. "Jake will transition into a management role with Henderson Holdings, overseeing all our former contracts and crews. It's a natural progression for someone with his skills and relationships." I found my voice, though it came out as a croak. "What about me?" Dad's pause lasted an eternity. "Honey, the Hendersons already have their business operations handled. Brett Henderson has been managing their contracts for years. There just isn't a place for you in the new structure." The betrayal hit me in waves. First, the realization that our family business, my grandfather's legacy, had been sold without my knowledge. Second, that Jake had not only known about it but had secured his own position while leaving me with nothing. Third, that this had been planned for months while I'd been excluded from every crucial conversation. "How long have you known?" I asked Jake directly, my voice barely steady. He finally looked at me, and I saw guilt written all over his face. "Madison, I wanted to tell you, but how long?" "Since September. 4 months. 4 months of family dinners where they'd all smiled at my face while planning my professional execution behind my back. 4 months of me working my ass off to improve a business I was being systematically eliminated from. The paperwork needed to be confidential until the deal closed," Dad explained, as if that justified anything. "Too many moving parts, too many people whose jobs depended on secrecy. I'm not people," I said, standing up so fast my chair fell backward. "I'm your daughter. I'm a partner in this business." "We're a partner," Dad corrected gently, and that gentle tone made it somehow worse than if head shouted. The business needed someone who could work with the Henderson team, someone they trusted. The implication was crystal clear: they didn't trust me. My own family didn't trust me enough to include me in the most important decision in our company's history. Jake tried to explain. "Madison, you have to understand, This wasn't personal. Brett and I have been talking about combining operations for months. It makes sense from a practical standpoint. Practical, I interrupted. You've been planning my professional funeral with our competitors for months, and you call it practical. Mom finally spoke up. Maybe we should discuss this later, when emotions aren't so no. My voice was firm now, powered by pure rage. We're discussing this now. I want to know exactly how my own family decided I was expendable. Dad sighed like I was being unreasonable. Madison, you're taking this too personally. Business decisions aren't always fair, but they're necessary. Henderson Holdings can provide stability that we couldn't guarantee on our own. Stability for Jake, you mean? Stability for everyone. The crews keep their jobs, the clients maintain service continuity, and Jake gets to lead a larger organization. And what do I get? The silence stretched so long that Emma's camera, still recording from where Shed dropped it, captured every second of my family's inability to answer that question. Finally, Dad spoke. You get the freedom to pursue whatever you want. Maybe start your own consulting firm, or join another company where your skills would be better appreciated. The freedom to pursue whatever I wanted, as if being exiled from my family's legacy was some kind of gift. Standing in that living room, surrounded by torn wrapping paper and the remnants of what Id thought was a loving family Christmas, I realized I had two choices: accept this betrayal gracefully and slink away, or fight back. The old Madison might have chosen door number one, might have preserved family harmony at the cost of her own dignity, but something had shifted in that moment, when Dad called my elimination from our family business a practical decision. Something hard and determined crystallized in my chest, and I knew I wasn't going down without a fight. I need some air, I announced, grabbing my coat from the hall closet. Madison, please don't leave angry, Mom called after me, but I was already out the door. I drove aimlessly through Millbrook's snow-covered streets, my mind racing faster than my car. There had to be more to this story. You don't just sell a 50-year-old family business overnight, especially not without involving all the partners. There were legal requirements, financial disclosures, stakeholder notifications, none of which had happened. My phone buzzed with texts from Emma. Are you okay? This is insane. Mom is crying. But I ignored them all. I needed to think clearly, and I couldn't do that surrounded by my family's guilt and fake sympathy. That afternoon, while my family pretended to enjoy the rest of Christmas Day, I was in my apartment's home office, logging into every business account I had access to. My laptop became my weapon, and spreadsheets became my battlefield. The first red flag appeared immediately. Our company's main operating account showed a massive withdrawal 2 weeks ago, exactly the amount Dad had mentioned as the Henderson payment. But the money hadn't stayed in that account long. Within hours, it had been transferred to a new LLC ID never heard of. Clarke Family Holdings. Digging deeper, I discovered that this LLC had been established 6 months ago with 3 partners: Dad, Jake, and surprisingly, Mom. Each held equal shares, which meant each would receive equal portions of the sale proceeds. Notably absent from the partnership agreement? My name. But here's where it got interesting. According to Connecticut state law, any sale of a business requires notification of all existing partners and stakeholders. As a documented partner in Clarke Construction since my return from Yale, I should have received legal notice of any proposed sale. The fact that I hadn't meant either the sale was illegal, or someone had forged documents claiming it'd been bought out of my partnership. I spent the next 3 hours creating a digital paper trail. Screenshots of bank transfers, copies of partnership agreements, email threads discussing business strategy, everything that proved I'd been an active, invested partner right up until the moment I was excluded from the sale. The most damning evidence came from an email thread between Dad and Tom Henderson that I found in our shared company server. The timestamp showed they'd been negotiating this deal since August, not the recent opportunity Dad had described. Even worse, several emails specifically mentioned handling the Madison situation and ensuring a smooth transition without complications. I was the complication they'd been planning to handle. Around midnight, my phone rang. Jake's name appeared on the screen, and after letting it ring 4 times, I decided to answer. Madison, we need to talk, he said without preamble. Now you want to talk? After 4 months of lying to my face. It's not that simple. Can I come over? It's Christmas night, Jake. Shouldn't you be celebrating your big promotion with your new Henderson Holdings family? The silence told me everything I needed to know. Madison, please, let me explain. Fine. You have 20 minutes. He arrived 15 minutes later, looking haggard and guilt-ridden. I'd made coffee, not out of hospitality but because I knew I'd need caffeine for whatever conversation was coming. Before you say anything, I started, I want you to know I've been doing some research tonight. I know about Clarke Family Holdings. I know about the August negotiations. I know you've been planning this since summer. Jake slumped into my kitchen chair like I'd deflated him. Madison, you have to understand. No, you have to understand something first. According to Connecticut partnership law, what you and Dad did was illegal. You sold my shares in the company without my consent or knowledge. That's fraud. His face went pale. We didn't mean for it to happen this way. How exactly did you mean for it to happen? Did you think I'd just disappear quietly? That I wouldn't notice my entire career being stolen from me? Dad said, you'd be happier doing your own thing. You're always talking about innovation and new ideas. He thought you'd want to start fresh somewhere else. Dad thought. Or you thought? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you saw an opportunity to eliminate your competition and took it. Jake flinched at the word competition. That's not fair. Fair? I laughed bitterly. Jake, you've been my partner, my twin brother, my best friend since we were kids. We planned to run Clarke Construction together. We talked about expanding, about building something even bigger than what Grandpa started. And you threw all of that away for what a management position with our former competitors. It's more than a management position. Brett and I are going to be co-owners eventually. Tom Henderson is planning to retire in 5 years, and you'll inherit a company twice the size of what we had. The pieces clicked into place. This was never about what was best for Clarke Construction. This was about you positioning yourself for a bigger empire. He couldn't deny it, which was denial enough. Here is what's going to happen. I continued, my voice steady, despite the rage burning in my chest. You're going to go home and tell Dad that he has 48 hours to make this right. Either I get bought out for fair market value of my partnership share, or I go to the state attorney general's office with evidence of partnership fraud. Madison, you can't. I absolutely can. And I will. I stood up, signaling that our conversation was over. Merry Christmas, Jake. I hope your new partnership was worth destroying your family for. After he left, I sat in my kitchen until dawn, plotting my next moves. If my family thought they could steamroll me into quiet acceptance, they were about to learn exactly what Madison Clarke was capable of when she stopped playing nice. By the time the sun rose on December 26th, I had a plan that would either get me justice or burn everything down in the most spectacular way possible. Either outcome felt like victory at that point. The day after Christmas, I was sitting in the office of Patricia Walsh, the most ruthless business attorney in Connecticut. Her reputation for taking down fraudulent family business deals was legendary, and her retainer fee was astronomical, but I was beyond caring about money at this point. This is textbook partnership fraud, Patricia said, reviewing the documents I'd compiled. Your father and brother violated multiple Connecticut statutes by selling your partnership interest without consent or proper notification. She leaned back in her leather chair, studying me with sharp gray eyes. The question is, what outcome do you want? Financial compensation, or complete restoration of your partnership rights? I want justice, I replied, and I want them to understand that actions have consequences. Patricia smiled, the kind of smile that probably made opposing counsel break out in cold sweats. Let's discuss strategy. We crafted a multi-pronged legal assault. First, a civil suit against Dad, Jake, and Clarke Family Holdings for partnership fraud, breach of fiduciary duty, and conversion of business assets. Second, a formal complaint to the Connecticut Department of Consumer Protection regarding the illegal business sale. Third, and most devastatingly, a request for preliminary injunction to halt all Henderson Holdings operations involving former Clarke Construction assets until the matter was resolved. This injunction will freeze everything, Patricia explained. No contracts, no payroll, no operations, nothing until the court determines the legitimacy of the sale. The injunction was the nuclear option. It wouldn't just hurt Dad and Jake. It would affect all 50 employees and dozens of ongoing construction projects. But my family had made this personal. And sometimes collateral damage is the price of war. Patricia filed all documents on December 27th. By noon, Tom Henderson's attorney was calling, demanding an emergency meeting. By 3 p.m., Dad was blowing up my phone with increasingly desperate voicemails. But I wasn't ready to negotiate yet. I had one more card to play. That evening, I drove to Emma's apartment near her art school. My little sister had always been the neutral party in our family, the peacemaker who stayed above the business drama. But Shed witnessed Christmas morning, and I needed her perspective. I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. She poured us both wine, her hands shaking slightly. Madison, what happened yesterday was insane. Mom's been crying all day, and Dad keeps pacing around the house muttering about lawyers. How long have you known? Emma's face crumpled. I suspected something was wrong at Thanksgiving. Dad and Jake kept having these whispered conversations, and Mom was acting super weird whenever anyone mentioned the business. But you didn't know about the sale, not until yesterday. I swear, Madison, if I'd known they were planning to screw you over like that, I would have warned you. I believed her. Emma had never been good at keeping secrets, especially ones that involved hurting people she loved. I need you to know something, I continued. This is going to get ugly before it gets better. I'm not backing down, and Dad and Jake are going to try to make me look like the villain who's destroying our family. Emma nodded slowly. What they did was wrong, Madison, completely wrong. You built that company as much as anyone. Having Emma's support meant everything, but it also made what I was about to do more complicated. Because my final card wasn't just going to hurt Dad and Jake, it was going to expose secrets that would shatter our entire family's foundation. The next morning, I received a call from Uncle Robert, Dad's younger brother who lived in California, had heard about the family situation, and wanted to understand what was happening. Madison, your father called me last night, ranting about lawyers and injunctions. He says you're trying to destroy the family business out of spite. Uncle Robert, did Dad ever tell you about Grandpa Joe's original will? Long pause. What about it? I found something interesting while researching the company's legal history. Grandpa Joe's will specifically states that Clarke Construction should remain in family hands, with equal partnership opportunities for all direct descendants. Dad violated Grandpa's explicit wishes when he excluded me from this sale. Another pause, longer this time. Madison, I think there's something you need to know about that will. What Uncle Robert told me next changed everything I thought I knew about my family's history. Apparently, there had been a major dispute after Grandpa Joe's death about the inheritance structure. Dad had convinced the family that Grandpa's will was outdated, and that modern business practices required more flexibility. But Uncle Robert had kept copies of the original documents, including a codicil that Dad had forgotten to mention during probate. According to Grandpa Joe's final wishes, any sale of Clarke Construction required unanimous consent from all family members holding partnership interests. Even more importantly, the will established a trust structure that would ensure the business remained in family hands for perpetuity. Your grandfather was terrified that someone might sell the business to outsiders, Uncle Robert explained. Had seen too many family businesses destroyed by greed and short-sighted thinking. This was bigger than partnership fraud. Dad hadn't just violated my rights as a partner, had violated Grandpa Joe's legally binding trust requirements. The entire sale to Henderson Holdings was null and void. I immediately called Patricia with this information. Her excitement was palpable. Madison, this is enormous. We're not just talking about partnership fraud anymore, we're talking about trust violation, which carries criminal penalties. Your father could face serious jail time for this. That evening, I sat in my apartment, staring at the legal documents that would either restore my family or destroy it completely. The preliminary injunction was already wreaking havoc. I'd heard through industry contacts that Henderson Holdings had been forced to halt 3 major projects, laying off dozens of workers temporarily. My phone rang constantly, Dad begging me to discuss this like adults. Jake pleading with me to think about the family. Mom crying about how I was tearing everyone apart. But none of them were addressing the fundamental issue: they had stolen my inheritance, my career, and my future, then expected me to smile and accept it gracefully. The next morning brought a surprise visitor, Brett Henderson himself. He showed up at my apartment at 7 a.m., looking like he hadn't slept in days. Madison, we need to talk, do we? Because according to my family, you're the one calling the shots now. Brett looked genuinely confused. What are you talking about? The Henderson Holdings takeover of Clarke Construction, your brilliant plan to eliminate me from my own family business. His confusion deepened. Madison, I think there's been a massive misunderstanding. What Brett told me next was the final piece of the puzzle, and it was so much worse than it imagined. Brett Henderson looked genuinely bewildered as he sat across from me in my living room, clutching a coffee mug with shaking hands. His next words would reveal a truth so twisted that it made my family's betrayal seem almost quaint by comparison. Madison, I need you to know that Jake approached us, not the other way around. I set down my own mug carefully, my legal training kicking in. Explain. Back in August, Jake contacted my dad out of the blue. He said your father was considering retirement and wanted to explore succession options. He presented it as your dad's idea, but made it clear that he, Jake, should be the primary point of contact for any negotiations. My stomach dropped. What exactly did Jake tell you about me? Brett's discomfort was obvious. He said you were brilliant with numbers and strategy, but that you'd been talking about leaving Connecticut anyway. Something about wanting to start fresh in a bigger market, maybe New York or Boston. He made it sound like you were already mentally checked out of the family business. Every word felt like a physical blow. Jake hadn't just excluded me from the sale, had actively sabotaged my reputation with the buyers, painting me as unreliable and disinterested. Jake also mentioned that your dad was concerned about personality conflicts between you two. He said your father thought it would be healthier for the family if you pursued opportunities elsewhere. Personality conflicts. Look, Madison, I barely know you, but from what I observed at family dinners, you seemed totally committed to Clarke Construction. When Jake described you as someone looking for an exit strategy, it didn't match what I'd seen. But he's your twin brother, I figured. He'd know you better than I would. Brett leaned forward, his expression earnest. Here's the thing that's been bothering me. My dad initially wanted to structure the deal as a three-way partnership. Him, your father, and both you and Jake as junior partners. It was Jake who insisted that wouldn't work, who pushed for a structure where he'd be the sole Clarke family representative. The room started spinning. Jake hadn't just gone along with Dad's plan to exclude me, he'd orchestrated it. Every conversation, every negotiation, every decision had been manipulated by my own twin brother to ensure it'd be eliminated from my family's legacy. There's more, Brett continued reluctantly. Jake told us you'd been embezzling money from company accounts to fund some kind of side business. He said your father was trying to handle it quietly, but that it was another reason why bringing you into the Henderson deal wouldn't be appropriate. Embezzling. I could barely get the word out. I never believed it, Brett said quickly. The numbers never added up, and frankly, someone skimming money doesn't typically invest in expensive business management software or spend their own money on industry conferences. But Jake was very convincing about your alleged financial improprieties. My mind reeled as I processed this information. Jake hadn't just excluded me, had systematically destroyed my reputation with lies about my commitment, my character, and my integrity. Every story, every concern, every reason why I couldn't be trusted had been manufactured by the person I'd trusted most in the world. Why are you telling me this? I asked. Brett looked genuinely uncomfortable. Because this legal injunction is destroying both our companies, and I'm starting to realize we may have been played by Jake just as much as you were. My dad's furious that he's been dragged into what appears to be a family fraud scheme. He pulled out his phone and showed me a text thread between him and Jake from the night before. Jake was panicking, begging Brett to talk sense into Madison, and warning that I was unstable and vindictive. The text painted a picture of someone desperately trying to control a narrative that was falling apart. Madison, I think Jake saw an opportunity to eliminate his competition and took it, but he played my family in the process. And now we're all caught in his web of lies. After Brett left, I called Patricia Walsh with this new information. Her assessment was swift and brutal. Your brother didn't just commit partnership fraud, he committed wire fraud, conspiracy to commit fraud, and potentially racketeering if we can prove this was part of a larger pattern of deception. We're talking federal crimes now. But I wasn't satisfied with just legal justice anymore. Jake's lies had poisoned not just my relationship with my family, but my professional reputation in the industry. If Henderson Holdings had been told I was unreliable and dishonest, who else had Jake been spreading these lies to? That afternoon, I made a series of calls to other construction companies in our region, competitors, who might have heard rumors about my supposed exit strategy or financial improprieties. The results were devastating and illuminating. 3 different company owners confirmed that Jake had reached out to them over the past 6 months, ostensibly to network and discuss industry trends. But in each conversation, had managed to work in concerns about my instability and my plans to leave the family business anyway. Had been systematically sabotaging my professional reputation across our entire industry. Even worse, I discovered that Jake had been positioning himself as the stable Clarke sibling, the one who could be trusted with major projects and long-term partnerships. Had stolen not just my inheritance, but my entire professional future. But Jake's most devastating lie was still to come. That evening, I confronted Mom directly. I drove to the family house, where I found her alone in the kitchen. mechanically washing dishes that were already clean. Mom, we need to talk about Jake's version of events. She couldn't look at me. Madison, this whole situation is just so painful, Mom. Did you know Jake told the Hendersons I was embezzling money from the company? Her hands went still. What? Jake told them I was stealing from Clarke Construction. He used that lie to justify excluding me from the sale. Mom turned around slowly, her face pale. That's not. Jake wouldn't. Mom, what did Jake tell you and Dad about why I shouldn't be included in the Henderson deal? The silence stretched for an eternity. Finally, in a voice barely above a whisper, Mom said, "He told us you'd been meeting with other construction companies. He said you were planning to leave anyway and start a competing business using our client lists and trade secrets." Another lie. A lie so sophisticated and believable that it had convinced my own parents to see me as a threat rather than a daughter. Mom, I have never, ever met with competing companies about leaving Clarke Construction. I have never planned to start a competing business. Every meeting I've taken, every conference I've attended, every business relationship I've built, has been for the benefit of our family company. The truth hit Mom like a physical blow. She gripped the counter for support, her face crumpling as she realized the magnitude of Jake's deception. "Oh, Madison. Oh, honey, what has he done?" What Jake had done was orchestrate the most sophisticated betrayal I could have imagined. Head lied to the Hendersons about my character and commitment. Head lied to our parents about my loyalty and intentions. Head lied to our competitors about my plans and stability. And had done it all while looking me in the eye every day, pretending to be my loving brother and business partner. But Jake had made one crucial mistake in his web of lies. Had underestimated exactly how far I was willing to go to expose the truth and claim my justice. The emergency family meeting took place on New Year's Eve, exactly 1 week after Jake's lies began unraveling. Patricia Walsh had spent the week building an airtight case that would have sent Jake to federal prison for at least 5 years. But I'd decided on a different kind of justice, one that would be far more satisfying than any prison sentence. We gathered in Dad's study, the same room where Jake had been shuffling those legal documents just a week earlier. Mom sat clutching tissues. Dad looked like Head, aged 10 years. And Jake couldn't stop fidgeting with his phone like he was expecting a call that might save him. "Before we discuss any resolution," I began, "I want everyone to understand exactly what Jake did." I laid out the evidence methodically. The fabricated stories about my disloyalty, the lies about embezzlement, the systematic destruction of my professional reputation, the manipulation of our parents' fears about family stability. Each revelation hit Jake like a physical blow, and by the end, even Dad was staring at his son with undisguised horror. "Jake." Dad's voice was barely controlled. "Is this true?" Jake's defense was pathetic. "I was trying to protect the family business. Madison's ideas were too risky, too expensive. You thought you'd eliminate your competition by destroying my reputation." I interrupted. "You thought you'd manipulate our parents by painting me as a traitor. That's not I never meant, save it." My voice cut through his stammering like a blade. "Here's what's going to happen now." I pulled out a folder containing documents Patricia had prepared. Option 1. We proceed with federal charges for wire fraud, conspiracy, and racketeering. Jake goes to prison, Dad potentially faces charges as a co-conspirator, and the entire Clarke Construction legacy gets destroyed in a very public trial. The room fell silent, except for Mom's quiet sobbing. Option 2. We implement immediate corrective measures that restore my position and provide appropriate consequences for Jake's actions. "What kind of consequences?" Dad asked, though he looked like he already knew he wasn't going to like the answer. "First, the Henderson Holdings sale is immediately voided, with all assets returned to Clarke Construction. Second, Clarke Construction is restructured with me, as majority partner 60% ownership, and Jake relegated to a non-voting minority position. Third, Jake publicly apologizes to everyone he lied to about my character and business practices." Jake shot up from his chair. "You can't be serious. Madison, your brothers don't systematically destroy each other's lives for personal gain." I replied coldly. "Brothers don't lie to their parents about their siblings' loyalty. Brothers don't commit felonies to steal their sister's inheritance. But 60% ownership, that's not fair." "Fair." I laughed bitterly. "Jake, you tried to steal 100% of my inheritance. 60% is generous considering I could have you arrested instead." Dad cleared his throat. "Madison, what about the Henderson deal? Tom's not going to be happy about unwinding everything." "Actually, Tom Henderson is relieved. When Patricia explained to his attorney that had been defrauded into purchasing stolen assets, he was more than happy to back out of the deal. Apparently, he has no interest in being part of a criminal conspiracy, and if we refuse your terms, Jake asked, though his voice lacked any real defiance. Then Patricia Walsh files federal charges on Tuesday morning, and everyone in this room except Mom and Emma gets fitted for orange jumpsuits. The negotiation took 4 hours, but the outcome was never really in doubt. Dad knew he was facing potential criminal liability for his role in the fraud. Jake knew he was facing definite prison time if I pressed charges. And Mom, once she understood the full scope of Jake's deception, was firmly on my side. By midnight on New Year's Eve, I owned controlling interest in Clarke Construction. Jake retained 15% ownership, enough to benefit from the company's success, but not enough to ever challenge my authority again. Dad kept 25% as his retirement cushion, but the financial resolution was only part of my victory. Over the next month, Jake had to make a series of humiliating phone calls to every person Head lied to about me. He had to admit to the Hendersons that Head fabricated stories about my disloyalty and dishonesty. He had to confess to other construction company owners that his concerns about my stability were completely false. Most satisfying of all, he had to publicly acknowledge at the next Regional Contractors Association meeting that Head systematically lied about my character and business practices. The industry response was swift and brutal. Jake's reputation never recovered from the revelation that Head attempted to eliminate his own sister through lies and manipulation. Meanwhile, my stock rose considerably, not just for my business acumen, but for my restraint in not destroying Jake completely when I had the power to do so. 6 months later, Clarke Construction was thriving under my leadership. We'd landed the 3 biggest contracts in company history. Our employee satisfaction scores were at an all-time high, and my sustainable building initiatives had positioned us as industry leaders in green construction. Jake still worked for the company, but in a diminished capacity. He managed smaller residential projects under strict oversight, and everyone in the industry knew exactly why his role had been reduced. The twin brother Wad, once been my closest confidant, was now just another employee, and honestly, that felt like perfect justice. The most satisfying moment came 8 months after that devastating Christmas morning. We were at Emma's gallery opening for her photography exhibition titled Family Portraits, When Love Becomes Betrayal. Shed documented our entire family crisis through her camera lens, creating a powerful artistic statement about trust, deception, and redemption. As I stood in the gallery, surrounded by images that told the story of my near destruction and ultimate triumph, Dad approached me with tears in his eyes. "Madison, I owe you an apology that can never be adequate," he said. "Jake manipulated all of us, but I should have trusted you. I should have questioned his version of events. I should have remembered that you're my daughter, and daughters deserve better from their fathers." "Yes," I replied simply, "you should have. But here's the thing about family betrayal. It teaches you exactly how strong you really are. It shows you that blood relationships don't guarantee loyalty, that trust must be earned every day, and that sometimes the people who claim to love you most are capable of the greatest cruelty. Jake's betrayal didn't destroy me, it forged me into someone harder, smarter, and infinitely more careful about who I trust. Clarke Construction became more successful under my leadership than it had ever been under his, and my reputation in the industry grew stronger every quarter. The sweet taste of vindication never faded. Every successful project, every industry award, every moment of recognition was proof that Jake's lies about my abilities had been exactly that, lies designed to mask his own inadequacies and justify his theft of my future. As I write this story, it's been 2 years since that Christmas morning revelation, and in preparing to announce Clarke Construction's expansion into 3 new states, Jake still works for me, still reports to me, still lives with the consequences of his choices every single day. And honestly, watching him live with those consequences has been more satisfying than any prison sentence could have been. So here's my question for all of you watching. Have you ever experienced family betrayal that cut so deep you thought you'd never recover? How did you find the strength to fight back when the people who were supposed to protect you became your biggest threats? Drop your stories in the comments below. I read every single one, and I promise your experiences matter. If this story of family karma and ultimate justice resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more real-life drama stories. Share this video with anyone who's ever been betrayed by family. Sometimes knowing you're not alone makes all the difference in finding the courage to fight back. Thank you for following my journey from Christmas morning devastation to complete vindication. I hope my experience shows that sometimes the best revenge isn't getting even, it's becoming everything your betrayers said you couldn't be, and making them watch your success every single day. Here's to family karma, justice served, and the sweet satisfaction of proving your worth to people who bet against you. Stay strong, fight smart, and never let anyone steal your dreams, not even the people who share your DNA.